Well, we are approaching the 1 year anniversary since the deadly wildfires on Maui.
For the full hour today, Maui Mayor Richard Bissen is live in the studio to take our questions and yours. Spotlight Now starts now.
You're watching Spotlight Now with Ryan Kalei-Suji and Yunji Denise on Hawaii News Now. Have questions or comments for our guests? Join the conversation in our Facebook live stream. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, aloha, and thanks for tuning in here on this Tuesday for Spotlight Now here on Hawaii News Now. We are going to get to our guest, Maui Mayor Richard Bissen, in just a little bit, but we always want to start off the show by reminding our viewers who are watching both on air and online that you can engage with our guests by typing in your questions and comments in the Facebook section of our Hawaii News Now page, or by scanning this QR code that you see here on the bottom right-hand corner of your screen. We'll be tracking it throughout the show, and we'll be providing updates as we get these questions throughout our show.
Thank you so much for being here. We want to welcome in our guest now, Maui Mayor Richard Bissen. Mr. Mayor, thank you so much for making the trip and the time. We appreciate you being here.
Aloha, Yunji. Ryan, thank you for having me again.
We've got so much to reflect on, but we want to start with what's been happening just over the weekend in the last few days with fires on Maui, so close to the anniversary. Tell us the latest on the wildfire. What's the update, the containment, and how things are going?
Sure. This happened yesterday. It was reported about 9 in the morning in the Pi'ihana area in Wailuku town. And so the fire were called there, and with the help of the police department, we were able to evacuate 45 homes that were in that area, and that was the police going door to door to let them know about that. That fire was contained. It was about 4 acres, and it was contained by about 2:45 p.m. By the Maui Fire Department. So the reaction was swift, and most importantly, the evacuations went smoothly. And very shortly after they evacuated, they were allowed to go back to their homes.
I'm wondering, as you know, it's somewhat eerie as you approach this 1 year mark of the fires in Lahaina and Kula a year ago, and now dealing with fires again. What was sort of the response by community members? What you heard, and what do you think has been the biggest adjustment on the county's response in this past year?
Probably the biggest adjustment we've made. First of all, we increased our fire department by 29 firefighters, which the council approved in our last budget that we submitted this past year. So having more surge capacity, I think, is important. But what happened on the ground also is different. The way we have handled evacuations. You'll recall that in Lahaina there were door-to-door evacuations that were happening as well. Recently, the Crater Road fires that happened in Kula. We also had alerted our neighborhood through door-to-door, but we did not have to evacuate in that case, but we were ready to. So I think one area that I think I've seen improvement in, is in how we handle evacuations. Also, the EOC is very different from a year ago. Our former battalion chief, Amos Lono Kailua Hewitt, is now our administrator, and some of the folks he brought in are also former firefighters. So a very different tone, a very different tenor, if you will, in the EOC in terms of the way it's run. Very, very professional, I would say, and everyone seems to be singing off the same song sheet. They all understand the drill, the procedures, and you only have the people that need to be in the EOC as well. So I find the communication to have been much improved.
I want to ask you about some reporting that came out last week and over the weekend. Bloomberg News reporting that defendants had reached a tentative settlement earlier this month through a court order, which ordered basically $4 billion for 450 consolidated cases. And correct me if I'm wrong on any of this math. That is pending in State Circuit Court on Maui. What can you tell us about, there are some conflicts in there, from what I understand, between who gets paid out first, and who takes precedence, whether it's the insurance companies, whether it's the individual. When you're looking at all of this, and I'm sure the county is part of this consortium of people in this lawsuit, what can you tell us about this lawsuit? What can you tell us about this settlement? I'm sure that there's a lot you can't tell us, but just give us the latest.
Yeah, I mean, I was I guess, surprised to hear that this had been reported out as well. I'm supposed to say I think I can neither confirm nor deny at this point, but I would just say it's confidential, some of the terms of the agreement. But I think what you get to is important, that if a settlement is reached, it's a result of a lot of effort being put out by those that are helping to mediate this settlement, by those that represent the various parties, plaintiffs, defendants, of course, government agencies like ourselves, the state, and others. So I think what's important is not so much the detail on how things are divided, but whether or not our community can move forward. Really, one of the advantages of having any settlement in any sort of legal case is the ability to move to the next step, that is, in our case, recovery. So I'm hoping that whatever comes of this settlement, that people will see it as being fair for themselves, for their families, and it'll be swift. Pretty unheard of to reach a settlement this quickly in cases, but I think all the parties involved see the benefit of there being as fair of a resolution as can be reached. Difficult to please every single person involved. There's always compromise and sacrifices that get made when you reach an agreement, but you take out the uncertainty of a trial, you take out the uncertainty of the unknown, things that can change, the time over the years that it can take. So for me, what I'm looking at as mayor is how our community is doing in its recovery. And if this settlement helps with that, then of course, that's what I'd like to see happen. I'm sorry I can't really share any details at this point.
I guess, and to that degree, if you're able to share, I mean, how do you appease everybody in that phase? Because there may be some who are agreeable to a settlement. There may be others who say we deserved more. When you're talking about this large of a number with this many people impacted, how do you find that balance, and how do you bring the community together where they're no longer not only upset, but become upset with each other about a settlement like this?
Well, that's precisely the point, Council. You have hit it right on the nose. That is the point, is when you have a group settlement that requires buy-in from people, there's always going to be that individuality or that piece that, and that's where people's lawyers come into play, their family members, maybe their faith community. People get advice from a variety of sources, not just their lawyers. But that's where people can explain advantages and disadvantages. There's risk involved in going to trials. I mean, I guess that's just a fact. But if people feel like this is not for them, then they will opt out and they will not take part in a settlement. In those cases, will go to trial. And the ones that do accept, that feel like there are other, and it's not that the amounts that people are being offered is not important, because that's very important, but it's not the only factor. It's your mental health and your ability to move past and move on when you're ready. And again, everybody's state of readiness is very different, very individual. So it's hard to talk about this in any concrete way without actually talking about a specific case, because we're just talking about sort of the entire group. And I know that's all being taken into account by the attorneys, the mediators, and the people who are putting the hard work in. And we'll just accept whatever the outcome is.
I want to ask you about the rebuilding plans for Lahaina town itself. There have been a lot of community meetings, from what I understand. Can you tell us about where you are in that process, and how, similar to what Ryan was saying about making everyone happy in that case, it seems very difficult to make everybody happy. So how are you gathering that community input to come up with a plan on what happens next?
Yeah, I mean, I'm very proud of our team that's working in the field, our team that puts together these meetings. At one time we were having maybe 3 or 4 meetings a week because we included Kula. Before their debris was cleaned out, we were having weekly meetings in Kula. We were having weekly meetings in Lahaina with our community, but we were also having smaller meetings in Lahaina or Kahului with our community as well. And on top of that, we have an advisory team from Lahaina that also meets. They were meeting twice a week, and now they're down to once a week. So lots of engagement. I'm really satisfied with the way those meetings have gone. We have lots of followers on Facebook. So maybe the crowd is smaller, but the amount of people watching on on social media or Facebook, they're still getting the information. We have so much to report out every week. For example, we've cleared 1,346 of the 1,399 homes, properties, the lots. That's 96%. We had told the community we wouldn't finish until January or February of 2025, just of the clearing of the debris. So that tells you that. We have a dozen homes being built right now in Lahaina, and I think we might have one or two in Kula. But a dozen of those, we have another 37 permits that are that have been approved, and they're waiting to build. And we have another 70 that are waiting to come through. So we're always happy to report the progress. And for a long time, we were measuring the debris clearance as a sign of how we were doing. By the end of August, we'll have all the water back on in Lahaina. We told the community that would take 2 or 3 years. By the end of January, we'll have all the wastewater connected back in Lahaina. Again, we told them that'll take 2 or 3 years, but we couldn't have done that without the help of the EPA, who helped us clear a lot of those lines that needed to be done. Over 90,000 linear feet that needed to have cameras go through, and the EPA sped that work up by at least 2 years. So those are the things that we report at our meetings. We have mental health services come in. We have folks come in and talk about parks, talk about planning, talk about evacuation routes. Anything you can imagine, the topics cover each week. And I think we want the community to be informed and what's happening. They ask a lot of great questions. And we bring in all the partners. When we get questions we can't answer, we bring those partners in the next week and take it from there. So it's kind of a long answer, but that's how it's going.
No, great to hear those updates. I'm wondering, as you talk about some of these who are applying for permits, those who have been granted it and beginning that rebuilding process, what is their accessibility like? Are these homeowners who own this land and are now being able to come back onto their property, are they being granted this access and being able to just kind of come in and begin that process? Because we know that this is still an area that is protected and monitored and policed from people coming in. How are you navigating through that when you're trying to protect the space, but also allow these homeowners back onto their land?
So from the very beginning, when people's lots were identified as being next up for debris clearance, families were issued placards. They were either given 2 or 3 for their vehicles, and they could bring in whoever they wanted with them. They could bring in family, they could bring in media, they could bring in their faith leaders, whoever they wanted to come to their lot to see it before it was cleared. They could go through and look for things that they wanted to look for. So that all happened in advance. So they were given permission to come in. They were also notified of the day their lots were being cleared. They could stand there and watch everything be cleared. They could say, don't take down that wall. Don't take down that tree. Please leave this. Please take that. So very, very individual. They never lost those placards. Once their lots were cleared and gravel was put on it and the soil was tested and the soil came back clear, they could go back and visit their lots every day. So those people go through security by showing their placards. And those are the same people that can get a placard for their contractor, and their contractor can come in and start to build their homes.
There's a comment here from Diana, says, I can attest our Lahaina community meetings have been so beneficial. I'm interested, when we think about the homes that you said that are being rebuilt, I would imagine that those are relatively inland, but I'm curious about the coastal area, the shoreline itself. A lot has changed since Lahaina was first, built, and those shoreline setbacks are much more significant than they ever were, and the buildings right up against the water would not have been authorized under today's laws. So how are you thinking about what should go back to that particular area, or if nothing should go back to be in compliance with the current laws?
So shoreline property, shoreline management, special management areas, SMAs, are a very sensitive subject because those are very individual. And right now I can say we are taking those on an individual case-by-case basis. We have been having meetings with our communities, for example, neighborhoods. So our planning department has held meetings just for particular neighborhoods to talk about their unique challenges. And there is one on the SMA areas, the shoreline properties, because they know, a homeowner who lives on the ocean knows better than anyone else, better than government, what they are dealing with on their properties. I mean, think about what happens here on the North Shore and on your island, where people have had to use self-help to try to prevent their homes from falling into the ocean. I mean, the person who knows best is the person who lives in it every day. And so they understand the challenges. I think for us, my concern is any environmental impacts that can have health and safety concerns that can arise. Of course, sea level rise that we all know about. That's a real thing that's happening. Chip Fletcher is, of course, someone that you folks are familiar with. He's been very helpful as well, giving advice to us. So what we want to do is help our homeowners, our landowners, especially those that have been tied to their lands for generational homes that are there. And, you know, we're looking at ways we can help people who want to get back there. We've long discussed the issue of a land swap to Mauka of properties and trying to work that out. We don't have all the details worked out. We need to talk about whether they're government-owned lands, state or county, whether they're privately owned lands, whether they're acceptable. I mean, there's so many factors, again, individual, but we have not lost sight on that. And that's the area probably of the biggest conversation right now, because as you said, those that are not in the SMA, or if they are, they're say Mauka of the bypass, or other places that can start to be rebuilt. We definitely are, those are not being slowed down, but we are going to focus lot by lot on the shoreline.
And I imagine those are going to take a little bit more time as we're talking about some of these lots that are closer to the water, the more commercial areas. And as you're having these community discussions about what the future of the town looks like, at what point do you begin making some of those decisions so that that rebuilding process can begin?
Yeah, every day. I mean, those things come up every day. So our planning department is working on our long-term community plan. They'll be revealing that tomorrow night, as a matter of fact, at our Wednesday meeting. So for our listeners who are on Maui, they can listen or even online. That's going to be tomorrow. We do have, we are compiling all of those neighborhood meetings that took place with the planning department so they can take everyone's input and feedback and concerns into account in trying to offer what Lahaina can look like as we rebuild, obviously taking into account some of the significance of Moku'ula, Mokuhinia, taking into account, you know, other cultural and historic landmarks that exist. But what do the community members want? How do they want to see their town again be safer, be resilient, and be able to withstand some of the, or prevent or mitigate some of the issues that we've faced already, whether it comes to evacuation or location of homes and businesses.
I'm interested when you said that it's lot by lot for the shoreline. It is such a gut decision for a lot of these homeowners, these landowners. I mean, we see it on the North Shore of Oahu that people will do just about anything to save that parcel of land. Maybe it's something that their grandfather built, and you have similar, perhaps even deeper ties to some of these
Correct.
Properties. If you do it lot by lot, will there be this hodgepodge of the coastline where you have one lot and then one person who has done a swap or been bought out, or however that is resolved? Do you worry that you get this sort of checkerboard of a coastline there, that if the decision is not uniform, while at the same time trying to be respectful of the landowner and all of the, all of the heart and ties that go with it?
Yes. I am worried about many things. I am worried about how Lahaina will finally look in, beyond my time, how that will look, which is why we're trying to put all those safeguards in now to prevent that from being the case. A community plan takes into account many things, and some of the lots are more challenged than others, which is part of the reason. And I don't know if I would call it hodgepodge. Let's say one lot can be totally rebuilt, no issues, everything is perfectly capable of being restored. But the lot next maybe has eroded, fallen into the ocean, things have happened. That, in my opinion, if I'm the landowner in that case, I would rather make some sort of a trade or swap with government while there's still some value to my property to someone else. Because people can reject it and say, I'm not going to do a swap, and maybe put something back up there or maybe not. But at some point, they will have lost any value that anyone else would want to engage. So, not to make it sound so technical, but I think we as the government can absorb that trade, if you will, and have that lot be maybe an oceanside park, a wayside park, I should probably say, like we have out in Wahikuli, if you're familiar with Lahaina across the Civic Center, across Leali'i. Wahikuli Park is like a wayside park. I mean, it's not a lot of, it's a smaller piece of land. There are things we could do so that land has value, and you could put in a neighborhood park or something, maybe a couple of parcels. So I think in the planning side of things, we would have, a vision to where it's not hodgepodge or checkerboard. It would fit into the community plan, knowing that that's, a place that has maybe stressors to it, that it can't be livable, but it can still be usable.
I want to go back to talking about the infrastructure, because you mentioned some of the dates and benchmarks for things like water
Yes.
being restored and wastewater. What about electricity as you look to put up some of these lines again, or will they be underground? I mean, what has been the conversation like with the Electric Company and Utilities Commission about what that looks like, knowing that, there is a lot of sensitivity over how we got here in the first place? So what does that look like in terms of the infrastructure of just the electrical grid moving forward in this area?
Yeah, this has been the topic of conversation since August 9th, 2023. I can tell you. There's not a meeting that happens that does not get brought up. Of course, we're looking at lots of different alternatives in terms of how to fund something like that. I'm told by FEMA that they're not a source of funding for a private company. So, for example, if we owned the utility as a county government, we could apply for federal funds and have that, put in or help us to pay for that. But as a private company, we can't do that for them. So I guess the question has to be, that conversation has to happen with HECO, at the right time about, there are two kinds of lines I learned about through this process: distribution lines, transmission lines. Next time you visit Maui, you may notice our newer neighborhoods, all of the utilities are underground, and that's probably true here on Oahu. So we need to figure out ways how we can modernize, if you would, these areas so that people don't have that stress of possibly something like this happening. So it's definitely conversation. Whether they go to metal poles, which they did do much of that in Lahaina when they were restoring power. So to their credit, they did go to that help. But I think there are some lines, and again, I probably mixing up distribution with transmission lines, which is which, but some they've gone with back to wooden poles, and the others, of course, metal. We'd like to see that happen as well, especially now as we're rebuilding the town. It makes most sense to most people. But again, I think it'll come down to having that conversation with the utility company. But that is something that there's no hesitation. The community has spoken loud and clear about what they'd like to see happen.
Do you think that homeowners, if they have the desire to rebuild in their location, should be permitted to do so no matter what, regardless of the shoreline issues or other issues that, the permitting laws have changed over time, the density has changed over time?
Right.
Should they be allowed to build regardless?
Yeah, I don't get to make those decisions. I don't get to make those rules. These are health and safety rules that either come out of the state, because the shoreline, just so everybody understands, those shoreline properties are going to be dictated by state law as well. These are not just county decisions. We have a community plan, we have a planning commission, we have a county council, we have the office of the mayor. We have other regulatory agencies that get involved in some of these decisions. So, I think we all feel that, as citizens, we have a right to enjoy life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness, which includes, building on property that we own. But there are limitations. Health and safety being number one. Can you build a house all the way to the edge of your lot and not consider safety for your neighbors and others? I think those are the discussions that we have to have. And, I just want to say, for the most part, I find people to be very reasonable in understanding some of what we're talking about. Now, people don't necessarily like it. They don't like everything, but I think they understand that there are other factors to consider. For example, having a certified builder, a contractor, right? Somebody who's licensed, somebody who, if something happens to your property, you can go after them for repair. But of course, people want to build because we all have a cousin or an uncle or somebody that we know can help us. But, for us, requiring there be license, it's not just some law and some rule. And I like to tell people, it's all good as long as it's all good. But the minute it goes bad, then you look back and say, well, the government let me, build without a permit, without a license, and things kind of went bad. And there's lots for us to talk about as far as our community, but I don't think we can compromise the standards of health and safety.
I want to get your thoughts and just get an update on the federal government's involvement in this process, because when this first obviously happened, the federal government was here. We saw a large FEMA presence. What have things been like now, and how has your interaction been with this federal agency that has come in to help? Because in a conversation that I had with some federal FEMA officials, one of the things that they said is that this has been the most dynamic disaster they've ever been a part of. And in an organization where they are so used to structure and order, and there's a way of doing things, they have kind of thrown that out the window with this process. Can you just explain how things are, the dynamics between the federal government, FEMA, and the county at this point?
So I just want to qualify this by saying this is my normal. Everything that's happening to me as I interact with the federal government at all levels is a normal. I don't know how it is in other places because I have never experienced this before. So I have to say that dealing with most, if not all, of the federal agencies has been very professional and very compassionate in my interaction. Of course, I'm not one of the impacted citizens that have been either rejected or moved several times, and so you'll get people that have had negative experiences on occasion. But I would just say at my level, discussing with the government, whether it's the President of the United States or the head of FEMA or secretaries of Homeland Security, they have all just been very helpful to us. There's going to be a federal oversight hearing that is coming to Maui in either September or October, and I've already been given an invitation to come and be a witness to speak to that. And their purpose for coming is to say, how have the federal agencies responded to this Maui wildfire? So as you just said, Ryan, I've been told several times, this is the most complex disaster they've ever responded to for lots of reasons. The challenge of isolation and getting material and getting help here. But since day one, they have poured a lot of resources. There was a time there was over 1,000 federal folks on Maui helping in the response and the emergency response. They are setting up an office, FEMA, for example, with 120, 130 hires, permanent for, when I say permanent, for the next 5 to 7 years, I'm told. So they've set that office up to run, to help while they're on Maui. But whether it's EPA, the SBA, the Army Corps of Engineers, I have found them to be very, very, I don't want to say compassionate. What's unique about this response is, for example, cultural monitors, cultural sensitivity. Every group that comes to Maui that's from outside of Hawaii, they undergo a cultural sensitivity training. So they understand the culture and what's happening and what's significant, especially about Lahaina. A lot of them start with pule in the morning, along with our local folks. It's fascinating to see some of the change that has happened with the folks that came here, who have been changed forever because their time here on Maui. We just said bye to Carl Banks from EPA last week, Wednesday, and Mark, I want to say Worthington, but I'm forgetting his last name now. But he was from FEMA and also assisting us. They've been here since pretty much the first weeks and just left now, their assignment. And that's only because they have to be rotated out after so many weeks. But they can tell you that they have also been changed by what's happened. So I think the interaction has been mutual. We've learned a lot from them. They've learned a little bit from us. But as mayor, and in dealing with these federal agencies, it has not been difficult. They have met many of the needs that we've requested. They've done things different here. they're clearing the business commercial properties, which they normally don't do, and they've done about 40% of those already. They've cleared out vehicles, about 3,000 so far. They don't normally do that either. Taking the time to have cultural monitors at each site, they don't normally do that. So we've heard more than once how this has changed the way they look at responding to disasters. Our community meetings, unheard of. They don't do this in other parts of the country. They come in and they tell people, this is what's going to happen, this is how you're going to do it, and this is what happens. They're not used to us having so much feedback from our community, but that's all informed them to have a better outcome. So I'll have more to say when I'm asked questions by Congress, but my answer is going to be very similar to what I just said.
Well, okay. Well, we're continuing our conversation with Mayor Richard Bissen. We're going to take a quick break. Stay with us. We'll be right back.
Welcome back here to Spotlight Now. We continue on in our conversation with Maui Mayor Richard Bissen. Again, we want to remind those of you who are watching that you can insert your questions to the Facebook section of our Facebook page at Hawaii News Now as we continue on in these conversations. Mayor, we've spent the first half primarily talking about Lahaina, but another area, of course, that was impacted by the fires a year ago was the community of Kula. Yes. Oftentimes forgotten about some of the damage and destruction that happened in that community. What can you tell us about their rebuilding efforts at this point in time?
Yeah, so they also lost 26 homes, I believe, were destroyed. And luckily, we got to spend a lot of time going through that community as well. I mean, there's more to do as far as cleaning up some of the areas of I want to call them a gully or ravines that exist there that can also cause. They did have some of the caused some of the damage that occurred there after the fires and some of the flooding that can take place there. It sort of backs up the trees and debris that are in there, so that needs to be cleared. But that community has been also very, very resilient, and we're not forgetting Kula, especially as we come up on the 1-year remembrance with them as well. They've also been having permits approved, and again, we are dealing with contractor 4-Leaf. That's the name of the vendor that we've hired, and they're giving out permits to folks that have applied for those, including our Kula community. So we're very grateful for their patience and their working with us as well.
You mentioned earlier the possibility of land swaps, taking some of the land in Lahaina and swapping it with land that is further upcountry or Mauka, obviously, of that area. I'm interested in where you are in that process.
Sure.
And whose land are we talking about here, and what would that actually look like?
So, we're still working out the details of that. The Mauka I was referring to was Mauka in Lahaina, not upcountry Maui. So I think lots of our Lahaina families want to remain, obviously, on the west side. So where we're at with that is discussing with the large landowners that own property on the west side of Maui, whether some of them could be state land, it could be our land as well, county lands. The Department of Hawaiian Homelands has a large presence there as well. Of course, they have a different responsibility to the Hawaiian community. But everything is on the table as far as who we're considering to discuss some of those land swaps with.
And how long is that process, do you think that's going to take?
Okay, so some of that might be connected in tangentially with the settlements that are happening right now that you mentioned earlier. So I think once we can set that in motion or it's done, I think we can start to have more concrete discussions on the next piece, which is either land swaps, land purchases, as part of settlements. I mean, there can be lots of discussions about how that might look.
As we continue on in this discussions about what has happened a year ago, you look at what's happened since then, and there have been still a number of fires that have broken out, not only on your island, but we're seeing it throughout the state. And you begin to wonder, as you're trying to deal with everything that happened last year and navigating still to protecting the community through these other fires, most recently as yesterday on the Pi'ihana fire. How are you navigating through that from a budgeting standpoint as you prepare for your own budget, disaster preparedness, pouring more money into, say, the fire department? You mentioned more firefighters were hired, but this is becoming more and more of a frequent threat through residents. I'm wondering if you can share about conversations you're having with the legislature on the federal level about how you subsidize all that it costs to battle these blazes.
Yeah, I think you've also made another good point that things don't stop. When you have a disaster, the rest of your community and the rest of your responsibilities do not come to a stop. In fact, they get exacerbated that you have, more to do possibly with less. Now, one of the things that happens in disasters that I've learned is it triggers access to funds that you wouldn't not ordinarily be able to access. And so there are funds available for people who experience disasters, and we are working, we have a consultant, I guess. We have several consultants who work with disasters and who advise us on how we can, number one, get reimbursed for some of the expenses we've put out directly, related to the fires. So we have folks who can tell us, hey, make sure you save that receipt, make sure you make that request, make sure you put that in. That's, reimbursable. That's not. So that's really important as a government to be able to have folks who are to that type of stuff that we can qualify for. So that's a big thing that we're making sure we dot the I's and cross the T's, because while FEMA can offer you reimbursed assistance, you still have to do the correct paperwork. Because what happens oftentimes, and what we've learned and heard from others, is if you don't do it right, what you think you're getting, you don't qualify for. So it's always it's not so much the people on the ground, it's going to be the auditors that are in the back of the house that are going to make those calls. And so we're trying to be very careful that we can do the best for our community by investing in a consultant who can help you with that. So that's how you get more access to federal funding. And believe me, so many people will come and offer you that as well. I'm not talking about donors on the private side. I'm talking about government people who says, hey, did you think about the Department of Transportation, the Department of Energy, the Department of Interior? I mean, there's so many different places that have pockets of money that you can qualify for now. A big piece we're waiting on is CDBG, Community Development Block Grant, DR, Disaster Relief. That's a separate fund that, I went with the delegation to D.C. To go and make sure we advocated for that. And as a direct result, late June, a letter came out of the White House that went to the Congress saying, hey, pass this bill, fund this bill. And in that letter, they referenced the Maui wildfires as one of the big reasons for this happening. So we know they're listening to us, they're hearing us, and they're making the necessary requests. So we're waiting on that to happen. We're hoping it'll happen before the start of the fiscal year, which is October. And so we're hoping in the next month or two, we'll find out if we were successful in receiving those funds. Those funds are really significant because most of that money goes to housing. So when you asked the question earlier, how are we going to fund people's homes? Well, if we can get that disaster relief funds, that's exactly what it's for. We can help rebuild buildings that were housing kupuna, some that were built by the state, some that were built by private nonprofits. We can help with those funds. They can also be used as match. These are the only federal funds that you can use as a match to leverage more federal funds. It's the only ones of its kind. All other federal funds, you have to use it for its stated purpose. So if we can get let's say a 25% match on a $100 million loan, that's all that money we bring in and we use it. So we got to be really strategic. And we're learning so much from all of this. I mean, obviously it's the drinking from the fire hose analogy that people talk about, but you got to be willing to stay in the fight and not sort of, give up because you feel tired or something. It's got to be, get energized. And the hope and the promise of getting help to your people is what keeps you going.
Yeah, let's talk a little bit about what has been keeping you going, because it's been quite a year. And as you said, life keeps coming at you. Things keep moving. We've had, a lot of things come out of the legislature, just a lot of moving parts while you're still trying to help this community recover. Talk a little bit about what it's been like for you personally as a leader to navigate this last year.
Okay. So my career, if you know, I spent 15 years as a prosecutor. 8 of those years I was the county prosecutor on Maui. I spent 17 years on the bench as a judge. And so I thought I knew my purpose, which was to be a protector in our community. I mean, that's the path I chose. I never thought of this job as fitting into that. I thought law enforcement, on the bench, yeah, that's protect us. But now that I'm here and now that this all happened, I realize a renewed purpose. The purpose is to protect, right? So that's, I think, sort of the short answer. Besides having a supportive family and I just got a top-notch group of directors and deputy directors and staff. And what I mean by that is we all met after this happened in August. And I asked for people, if you want to be in the fight, stay in. If you're not going to be in the fight, now's the time to go. And nobody left. Everybody's here. They're like, we're gonna stay in the fight. So I think having that collective, everybody knows the task is to get our people home to their homes and their lands. And so I think everybody's on board. It's helpful. I get to come to these interviews. I get to answer the questions, but those are the guys doing all the work, really. I just try to be whatever little inspiration I can be to them by keep going, so they see, let's keep going. But yeah, the renewed purpose of being a protector is what's come out to me.
I want to ask you about obviously a big industry in your community, and that is tourism. And there was some concern and doubt over what happened here, that tourism on the island would suffer because it is such a large engine for your local economy there. How are things looking on that front, on the tourism front, with visitors coming and what you're seeing? And is it to the levels that you were anticipating and hoping for to help generate more for the local economy there?
Yeah, I think it's hit and miss. I travel a lot. I just got on a flight this morning and it was very busy. The airports were busy coming over. Other days I travel. I was over here on Sunday and it looked pretty light. So I think it's hit and miss as far as tourists on Maui coming to Maui. One of the things I was, a little disappointed in is that how what happened to us impacted the other islands because I think there was either missed messaging or even mixed messaging. People thinking maybe not familiar with the geography, thinking, oh, all of Hawaii had been suffered, and for that, I wished that could have been avoided because there's no reason that the other islands suffered what we were suffering and going through. And I meant as far as folks not coming to visit their islands. The fact of the matter is, one of the signs of recovery is economy. I mean, we're focused on residents getting back to homes, and that's really our job as government to making sure. But we're hoping there'll be other entities that will work on making sure our jobs are back and people have money to afford, remaining on Maui. And so I think that we'll have more to talk about once we get past some of the milestones that we've been talking about, the 1 year remembrance, the homes coming up. I think our focus is appropriately on our residents. And I really appreciate our business community, especially in Lahaina, for the patience that many of them have demonstrated understanding this dynamic that we were experiencing of getting people home. Those are their workers. Those are the people that are going to fill their ranks. And so it's going to take everybody working together. I think we do have a plan, in terms of priorities. And I think we'll be ready to execute on the business side really, really soon.
Tell us a little bit about the Remembrance plans and how people can participate. We know we've been focused so much on the rebuilding and the next step, but we do, of course, want to honor and respect the more than 100 people who lost their lives and so many in the community who lost their homes and businesses.
So Kuhinia Maui is a website people can go to, and it's going to talk about the 9 events that are being planned over 4 days. I'm really grateful to the Board of Education and for Superintendent Hayashi. They approved the 4 Lahaina public schools to have the day off on August 8th so the families and can all take the time to do what they need to do on that day. But that day is going to start with a paddle out early in the morning out at Hanaka'o'o, or otherwise known as Canoe Beach in Lahaina. There was a similar paddle out initially last year, but this will be one that's organized, supported, logistics. So we'll get people out there who want to be out on the water. There was a strong push from the community for that to happen. Later that morning at about 11, I'll be up in Pukalani at the Hannibal Devar Center, honoring and working with the Kula community for that remembrance on that day. And then later in the afternoon at 5 o'clock at the Lahaina Civic Center, we'll have a remembrance, mostly run by our Lahaina community folks out on that side. The next day, which is Friday, there'll be a kupuna event happening out at Lahaina, and then that evening, there's going to be a concert at the Lahaina Civic Center. Lahaina people, Lahaina groups singing, honoring songs of Lahaina. There'll be other groups not from Lahaina, but there'll be both, some from and from outside Lahaina. The next day, Saturday, 1 o'clock, they're going to have the Kamehameha Schools Kapalama 5th grade class, now soon to be 6th grade. And mahalo to Jack Wong and the trustees for funding this to have those. There are 140 kids that are flying in on a chartered flight from Oahu to come to the Baldwin High School auditorium and perform Kamalu Ulu Olele, which was a play they did last year to honor Lahaina. Not everybody could see it, so it's a repeat performance, but it's appropriate. They wanted to do something, so we set that up in Central Maui for folks to come. That evening, I think it starts at 6, the Lahaina County Mall, is the Obon Festival. That Obon Festival was going to happen anyway among the 3 or 4 Jodo Mission, Hongwangji shrines and temples from Lahaina. I think 3 which had burned down. They were going to have this celebration. So we adopted that into our Kuhini event so we could support that financially as well as logistically. So that's going to be a big event. And just so you know, in Lahaina, their communities, it's a multi-ethnic celebration of Obon Festival. It's not limited as people might think, oh, that will be for the Japanese culture. It's for everybody to attend. Finally, on Sunday at noon at the Civic Center, we'll have all the multi-faith pastors and deacons, ministers come together and do a celebration. I believe they're asking for a worldwide moment of silence at exactly 12 noon. And then we end in the evening at 4 o'clock at the Oski Rice Arena up at Makawao. Where the rodeos are held every year. and that's for a final closing out with the Upcountry community. And just to note, again, big thanks to the Oski Rice Arena folks. When the Kula fires were going on, they accepted all of people's animals that were threatened by the fires. They were all housed at Oski Rice. So those are the 9 events over 4 days.
Wow.
There's a lot happening there. I'm wondering, as you talk about this 1 year, it is obviously a moment of reflection. And as you look back to this past year or to this moment a year ago, is there any moment that stands out in your mind the most that you'll always remember, whether it be an interaction with a family or the moment you realize this, or what, when you look back and when you think back and you reflect, what is that one thing that stands out in your mind the most?
Yeah, I'd have to say there are too many events that I think start to just flood my mind right now. I don't know, for some reason I keep going back to being with our team in our conference room and talking about how we were going to get through this and come through this and how we're going to bring everybody along. All the folks who volunteered to step into places that they were unfamiliar with but just wanted to get in the fight. Yeah, too many. I mean, the folks that helped out at our shelters, so many people that came to our aid. And I just hope when we get up and running that we can also do the same for others and be there for other groups that have already helped us. Yeah, I can just say this: I'm so proud of our community, for sticking with us and being in there, engaged with us too, working alongside. Unbelievable resilience for people who've lost everything to be able to, come to our meetings and accept whatever little bit we could offer to them to get through. The folks that and this is more of a regret, are the folks that left. About 4,000 people who left Lahaina after the fires. I'm hoping we can figure out ways to bring them back home. But my thoughts are always with the folks that are struggling day in and day out. The little things we take for granted that they have to struggle with every day are the things that I think keep us going. So,
where do you hope we are in a year from now?
Yeah, we have, I'm proud to say, because of all the help, are along quicker than when we were. I can remember back in September when somebody asked me, I just want to know, tell me right now, when can I get a building permit? And I said, it won't be for another 2 to 3 years. And the person said, I just want to know, right? And I said, based on what we know from other jurisdictions, and we got 12 homes coming up in, right now in Maui. 12 homes. I mean, that's big. I hope a year from now we'll have obviously way more than that throughout Maui. I mean, I think that's one of the signs that, that we're coming back, we're fighting back, making our way back. But I just want the community to be a safer community for all of our folks when they come back. But we just want to do everything we can to get people back to their lands. And I hope from a year from now, we'll have some of those folks come back to Maui, the 4,000. And of course, the ones who stayed and, were able to absorb and absorb what happened to them. I'm hoping we can get them back on their lands too.
So, of course, we know this is happening in just a few weeks with this 1 year celebration and all the events that you had mentioned. Beyond that, I guess in this next year, is there one specific milestone that you are kind of focusing on, whether it be the infrastructure piece or getting that plan of what Lahaina's rebuild is going to be? What would you say is the technically or logistically is the focus in the next few months? Yeah,
everything that we talked about today doesn't happen unless we have the infrastructure. So infrastructure, foundation, the Hawaiian word would be kahua, the foundation that you build your home on. That's what will be what we focus on. Because everything that you see, all the temporary homes that are coming up with the state project, Kalai'ola or Kilohana, the FEMA project that are all happening, they all happen because there's infrastructure. And infrastructure relates to water, wastewater, stormwater, runoff, roads, utilities. Those will be our focus for the long-term benefits of Lahaina and Kula. So, yeah, if I had to select one milestone, it will be us monitoring our infrastructure. Again, the thing about infrastructure, most, except for roads, they all happen underground. Like, you don't see them. So you don't see them as much as you see a house pop up. But the only reason that house can pop up is because there's water, utilities, and wastewater that's getting to that, at least in our neighborhoods. I'm not talking about off-grid. So that is where our primary focus is. And that's where a lot of the money's coming in from that we're asking for, the federal monies.
And And we are just out of time. Just very, very briefly, if you could give us one final thought as we go off the air today.
Yeah, I'm just so proud of the resilience that our community is showing, and I want us to continue to build on that momentum as we go into the next couple of weeks, and that we do our remembrance of all those that we've lost, and that we never forget that. That be our primary focus on August 8th.
Okay, thank you, Mr. Mayor, for making
Thank
the
you.
trip. We appreciate you being here. Stay with us. We'll be right back after this.
Spotlight Now with Yunji Denise and Ryan Kalesuji. Connecting you with newsmakers from throughout our islands. Going in depth with Hawaii's leaders and taking your questions live. Spotlight Now, where Hawaii comes to talk.
Well, great catching up with the Maui Mayor for the last hour, really getting an update on everything that is happening on the island of Maui, specifically with this anniversary coming up. He laid out a long list of things that are happening to commemorate this one-year celebration that's going to span over multiple days and really involve different parts of not only the Lahaina community, but the island as a whole.
Yeah, 9 events over 4 days. He laid out all of them and really honoring each of the sectors of Lahaina. When he, talked about all the different events, you really see the tapestry that made up that community. Also talking about some very significant milestones, 12 homes going up, more in the permitting pipeline. There's water coming on, and that is a huge, huge milestone for them. The next comes electricity and the issue that you raised about those underground lines and when that could happen.
Yeah, he's saying that the mayor's saying that is continuing a active conversation about what happens with the utility lines and what the infrastructure looks like moving forward. But you heard from the end there saying the key in this next chapter of the rebuild will be that infrastructure, ensuring that is in place for those residents who want to begin that rebuilding process. We also got a glimpse into what things are like on the federal level. The mayor saying that he is not only confident in what the federal government has been able to provide, but also very pleased with the response that they have made, noting that there is actually going to be a FEMA office that's going to be permanently on the island of Maui for at least, he says, 5 years to really help in this effort moving forward.
Yeah, more than 100 employees there permanently, well, semi-permanently in place. And he talked about just, the sort of difficult decisions that are being made when it comes to Shoreline and how close to the shoreline folks should be allowed to build or rebuild. And also this idea of land swaps. We're going to be hearing a lot about that in the next year. What should happen, and should homeowners perhaps be bought out, or property owners be bought out, or be able to swap land with the areas that are more inland. So still a lot of work to do, but very interesting to catch up with the mayor, and you hear a lot of gratitude that he has for his team and those who have supported him.
Yeah, and a lot of hope of recognizing the significant impact they've already made in 1 year's time. We'll continue to have more coverage on the 1 year anniversary of the Maui wildfires here on Hawaii News Now. Tune in next week here to Spotlight Now, where we continue on in our conversation with some of our leaders, including Superintendent Keith Hayashi and our Lieutenant Governor.
Yeah, Sylvia Luke is going to be here to give us an update on the preschool open doors program that she has laid out. Here's a lovely shot of Honolulu. We'll see you right here next week.